Welcome back to another episode of the Attitude Makeover podcast series. This is Saujanya Shetty, your host, and this is the CXO series. I have with me Pooja Goyal, a government awardee for representing women in India, a serial entrepreneur, and the COO and co-founder of Avishkaar. I met Pooja in a couple of these conferences in the past, and I think we hit it off in terms of values, our understanding of journeys, and our purposeful search for a balance between life and work, and a meaningful one. And that's what we pivoted on today. In our own ways, we bumped into the Stanford course of strategizing life using design thinking. And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we use methodologies and frameworks to have a more meaningful and conscious personal transformation? We dwell into the aspects of really introspecting to know yourself better, to understand the meaning of purpose, whether it is purpose towards our work, towards our community, towards our family and our own self, and how do you maintain a balance? How does this change every decade for us, whether it's in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and our later stages in life, how this balance changes, and are there frameworks that we can use to be more conscious and aware of how this changes for us, and thereby be more impactful in whatever we're doing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We go deeper into the Stanford course, but we also talk about how we applied that both in Pooja's case in her two startups, whether it was IntelliThoughts in the past or now Avishkaar, and me on how I applied the same concepts in setting up Attitude Makeover. We also talk about how metrics plays a useful role and having the right KPIs or KPRs to measure this balance and the role it plays, the impact it has in really being purposeful in our journey is also important. Like always, I hope you like this conversation. And if you do like, I look forward to more subscribes and seeing you again in the next episode. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for being part of the Attitude Makeover podcast, Pooja.
Hi, Saujanya. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's a total honor. I think I bumped into you in one of the events, and I think it's serendipity how we hit it off, and I really liked the conversations we had. And today's topic is again a very interesting one that you chose. So before I start, I normally spend some time for my audience to really get to know my guest well. So let's start with the inception of Pooja. Who's Pooja? What's early years like? Because a lot of what you go through in your early years, you carry it forward as experiences and beliefs in the future. So from there, let's start with just understanding who is Pooja.
Wow, that's a difficult question. So I'd say, like any woman, I wear multiple hats as an entrepreneur running Avishkaar, as mother of two daughters. One of them is going to be flying the nest in 2 weeks, off to college. Read a lot, love music, and in terms of where it started, I grew up in Jaipur. I'm the youngest of 4 sisters. And I had a brother who passed away when I was 2 years old. So kind of my early years were in the shadow of that grief in the house, where everybody tried to keep me shielded from it. So from my perspective, it was a very kind of cared for, cocooned, loved life. But I always knew that was in the shadow. And so I'd say, I grew up in a lower middle class family. My father used to work in in the Department of Telecom, and I got a lot of space to think and be who I wanted to be, with a lot of support from my sisters and my parents. There was just no pressure or no expectation per se. But my sister had a lot of ambition for me. She wanted me to do what they couldn't do. So she's always there as a rock for me. And one of the ways that I kind of got exposed to life outside that cocoon and Jaipur was reading. And, read a lot of Enid Blyton. And we used to have these Russian book fairs. I don't know if you remember, but there was these Russian book fairs that happen every year, every
In
6
Jaipur
months in
especially,
Jaipur.
yes.
So, my sister would make it a point to take me there, and we'd buy 1 or 2 Russian fairy tales, and grew up on those. But it allowed me to travel far out of that cocoon, and a lot of the drive to do what, or even realization of what was possible, came from that reading early on. Nobody from my family had ever gone out to do a professional degree or moved out of the city. So I went to a school called Sophia, where it was an all-girls convent, and pretty much after 10th, you either became a doctor or took arts. So taking math was not an option. I happened to participate in a scholarship test called NTSC. And that, the government, Rajasthan government, would provide scholarship, would give us some 500 rupees a week to come and attend the classes. And that was the first time I interacted a lot with students from other schools, boys from other schools. And when I asked them, okay, what are you planning to do? They say IIT. So that was the first time I heard of the concept of IIT, and that there was a place like that. And then I went to the only person I knew who might have some sense, my brother-in-law. He said, yeah, you'll have to take math. And my school agreed to let me appear for math. Exam through them, studied on my own, and then as luck would have it, I got through IIT. Did my 4 years in Delhi, studying chemical engineering, and feeling very lost as well. So it was also a very seminal time where, from a cocooned environment where you're used to in school being, at the top of the class, some of the subjects come easy to you. You land in this place where you're 13 girls among 300 boys, and you feel like there has been a mistake. Everybody else is smarter than me. Everybody has their shit together. I'm the only one who's kind of flailing here and don't know what to do. So those years were kind of defining years, but also a period when I formed some very close friendships that have lasted for all these years. Graduate, I realized I didn't want to do chemical engineering. And there have been many such periods in my life where I took the plunge outside of the field. So I worked in strategy consulting and product marketing for a bit before moving to the Bay Area, where I started my first company. And then the first company tanked after a couple of years in the big downturn of 2001. And then I decided to go do my MBA at INSEAD. Moved back to the Bay Area, where I worked with Adobe and Palm. And then I think 2007 it is when, for personal reasons, we moved back to India to take care of family for a few years. My daughters were 2 and 4 at that time. And at that point then, again, kind of the entrepreneurial bug caught me, which was a kind of coming together of a lot of factors. And I started in Telethoughts. It was an early years company which my friend and I from college built over 10 years. That got acquired by Clay a few years ago. And then again, I was at that point where
What
you're like,
next?
what next? And, it's like that was such a big part of my identity. And now suddenly, what now? Yeah, and then started my third company, joined my co-founder Tarun in building Avishkaar, which is the current company that I'm building.
How was that first startup failure? How did you take that? Because I feel like, when you're running an entrepreneurial journey, it's almost like how my partner says, we need to have balls of steel.
Yeah.
First, we need to develop that.
As women, yeah.
So, how was your experience? Because it sort of hits you in different ways, right? How did you go about?
So you feel very vulnerable and a personal failure as well, because you're kind of thinking, look, maybe we could have done this. Maybe that hire was not the right hire. Maybe we could have cut down burn a little earlier. But where roll down a few years, and now when you look back at it, and you can always say, a lot of learning that happened. But one thing I've realized through all of these ups and downs, right? You go through these ups and downs, and you are at the top of your game, and then there are times when you're at the bottom. A lot of what happens when you are at the top of the wave, things are just moving very well, and you come to believe that, well, that's because of me. I'm working so hard, and I'm so good, and I'm so much better than competition. And when you're at the bottom of but the truth is different, right? There is the tailwind that is supporting you. There is a rising tide that is lifting your boat. You were fortunate to find the right co-founder at that time. That one pilot opportunity customer, you happen to bump into them. And of course, you're working very hard and you have the skills to make it work. But then when you're at the bottom, you again feel, oh my God, I messed it up. I screwed it. I could have done that. It's like I never get that right. And, I used to beat myself up a lot early on. So now I've forgotten. I think I've blocked that from my mind. But at that time, I'm sure I beat myself up. Like, I wish I'd done this, right? And then in hindsight, you realize a lot of what happens is also a combination of factors, because you exist in this ecosystem and a lot of things have to come together. So, it was the big downturn of the century. It was 2001, the market had crashed, everything was coming down. So in hindsight, you can look at it and say, well, everything was crashing, not just me. But at that time, it just feels like, oh my God, my career is over. What am I going to do next? And, this was my first entrepreneurial experience and it has failed. And I think also there has been a mind shift in general as a professional community and the society. At that time, the concept of career ladder was very deeply entrenched in our brain. So it was like, you missed the ladder. Why didn't you go to a McKinsey or a BCG, or why didn't you go to IIMs right after that, right? And now there is the concept of career as a jungle gym or career as a career portfolio where you are building certain sets of skills, right? So at that time, it was very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I think I can relate with so many things here. One of the most important ones is you read, right? So for me, reading was a big part of me. One of the things I read was like, on an average, we go through 7.5 career portfolios as an individual.
Right.
And that was a shocking thing for me because I thought I was very unique because I kept testing new grounds and all that. But then I later realized, no, that's sort of normalized as a pattern itself now.
Yeah.
We were not used to it when we were growing up, because when you're growing up from a lower middle class, it's all about stability, establish yourself, have goals, grow, and things like that. And now the world has changed so much. I think there's a lot to learn from how this world dynamics is changing, and thereby how one's career sort of pans out as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think this generation of children will, or students will actually see 20, 30 changes in their lifetime. And we are already seeing that with the great resignation and with freelancing, remote work. You're just seeing these kids being very aware early on, and deciding to walk out of that ladder and that system that we were very comfortable with and even aspired for.
Yeah, yeah. Here's one example. I actually work with a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And he's very clear, like, I'm talking about our production team. He's like, Saujanya, I like doing this. I don't like doing this. So this is what what I'm interested in. Tell me if this works. This I don't want to do. And this clarity, I don't think I had it when I was 25, 35.
So, again, now that you look at what you do with your time, right? There is a demarcation. On one side is what the world expects you to do. It is the notification on your phone, the email, the boss asking you to do something, your children asking you to book an Uber for them. There are demands on you, and you kind of keep doing it and fulfill it.
Yeah.
On the other side is what you want of yourself, right?
Yeah.
I think when we were growing up, a lot of what we saw was from the lens of insecurity.
Yeah.
And it was almost about fitting in, and, doing what was best, because there is a certain level of, I think, financial freedom, a professional level you had to reach to be able to execute on that freedom, right? To be able to take advantage of, to be able to make those calls. I think the generation today, they understand themselves so much better.
Yes.
That lens is no longer there.
Yes.
The lens that they're wearing is, what do I want?
Yeah.
And what gives me joy? What doesn't give me joy? And so they are able to make those, and the opportunities have grown as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, if they decide to say, okay, I'm not going to take that McKinsey offer and go join this bootstrap startup, 6 months later, 1 year later, they have multiple options.
Yeah.
Which was different in our case.
Yeah.
Just 20, 30 years ago, right?
Yeah. I think recently we had Sonu, right? Sonu is this comedian. She is an engineer by education. And she was talking about how, she liked jokes and she was good at it. And then the internet just allowed her to experiment with that. She's not dependent on anybody. Okay, today I feel like cracking a joke. I record the whole thing. And it just allowed me to create my own, explore my own journey. And there are so many avenues then that just opened up, like, oh, you're so funny. Why don't you come and talk here? And that's what the opportunities they dabble with. And I think that's the kind of opportunities we also have, considering we will be working for a longer period. Life expectancies increase, so we will be working, and I think it's important to start looking at it from that lens. Now that you've had this journey so far, how do you free up your mental blocks to look at these opportunities, right? How has books been influential in this process for you?
So even as you were talking, right, I was thinking of this book that I read called Wanting by Luke Burgess. And he talks about this philosophy of Rene Girard, that, if you wanted to be happy, it's a simple problem. You can easily be. But your desire, so it's not a direct connection between your object of your desire and you. There is always an intermediary there. you want something that others want. So that's the mimetic desire.
You want something that others
Somebody
will-
else wants. It could be your parent, it could be your friend, it could be someone you care about, it could be someone you look up to. And a lot of our systems in our society are built on that mimetic desire. Right? So just coming back to books, I think books have been very books for me have provided that gateway into just other worlds, which I wouldn't have had access to had I not read. Even though I trained as an engineer now, I find just biology very interesting, and that started when I had my daughter when I was pregnant. I had all sorts of fears. What will happen? I should be doing this. I should be doing. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is such a miracle. It just, without me doing anything, this fully formed human beings come out, and then she's learning on her own, and one day she couldn't say a word, and the other day she can, and then she can walk, and it's a miracle.
And now they have opinions.
And now they have opinions. Oh, that she had even then, but that's a different matter. But so I got into the whole cognitive neuroscience bit. How is it that she's building all of this vocabulary of words and, just physical skills, emotional skills. And I went down the whole neuroscience rabbit hole and read some fantastic books and did some Coursera edX courses on that. And that just opens up a completely new world for you, like an Alice in Wonderland, right? It's like you didn't know that existed. I'd not been exposed to it. Yeah. And now it's a completely new world that you begin to understand and appreciate and understand the nuances of. Genetics is the same way. So early on, I read a lot of fiction, like I said, Enid Blyton, and then, college years was Ayn Rand and Gone with the Wind, books that, I didn't even know existed, and only when you reach college, I got exposed to them. And then later on, non-fiction. And at every stage of life, I feel like there are some books that have appeared to help provide answers to the questions I'm seeking. Yeah. And it might be because you focus on that part. You're thinking so much about it that you end up picking those kind of books. And some of them have been life-changing. So there is my all-time favorite called Flow. Yeah. And I still don't know how to pronounce the author's name. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Correct. He's another Stanford.
He's a Czech social scientist, and he is like the father of positive psychology. And it's a heavy read. So once or twice when I tried to read it, I didn't make sense to me. And I was visiting a friend in San Francisco, and while I was saying bye, I just happened to look at his bookshelf, and I said, "Oh, that seems interesting. I'll borrow it." And I took it, and I didn't read it for some time. But then a few years later, when I read it, it was life-changing for me, and it provided that framework of why are you, how do you find joy? How do you find meaning? And our general belief that leisure gives you pleasure. All of the studies, and he comes at it from a very scientific method, and lots of research studies, and he'll say that actually people have found that they feel most fulfilled when they're in a state of flow, which might be when you are deeply engrossed in something and finding a purpose for life. Another similar book was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And there was another book that I read at around the time when I was again going through this thing of what next, a book called Halftime, From Success to Significance. And it's, so I think at different stages of life, different books appear to clarify and provide you the necessary framework to think about it. So kind of you are in the midst of it, and when you are in the middle, you just can't see the picture. And then you zoom out a little bit. And you need some sort of framework to make sense of that madness that's going in there. Yeah. And the books have provided me with some of those frameworks or mental models to analyze the situation, to analyze the pattern, and then say, oh, maybe it's not too bad after all, or maybe here are 2 or 3 pathways that can be taken. Yeah. And one such book that we've talked about is Designing Your Life, which was after IntelliThoughts got acquired. I was thinking, what next? And I needed I zoomed out and I said, no, I don't know. Again, like this generation, we've not spent that time actively thinking about what gives next? Me joy, what gives me pleasure. It's always like, okay, this is the best thing to go for. You kind of create a pros and cons list and say, this makes sense, let's go for that. Yeah. And essentially start loving what you are doing. Rather than doing what you love, we've been in that, at least I've been in that mode. You love what you do. Yeah. And so at this time, then this whole framework provided me a very good way to understand a little bit of about myself, and also what might be fulfilling in the next phase of my professional journey or life journey.
For me, I think I've always been fascinated with science fiction. Actually, it comes together. I follow what's happening in the research of science with the space and also with the ocean, especially the cameras. Because if you see today, we've now gone beyond Earth to see there's more to the universe, and there's other galaxies out there similar to us. And the world down in the ocean is also getting more and more explored. And it sort of opens the whole philosophy of you're not alone.
Yeah.
Right? And right. I think it started with that curiosity, and I think that sort of binds me when it comes to books. And the second book that really stood out for me was this Lean Canvas. The first time someone gave me, they said, I was in HP and we were trying to do agile methodologies with hardware, which is very different from doing it for like your cloud software or just your applications or software. When you're doing it for a whole product like a printer, they take 3 years, 4 years, right? So how do you go into an agile model there? So first time I read it, I fell asleep. And to your point, it's like when you're constructing a house and you have to pick the door, suddenly all doors look like, oh, that looks nice, this looks interesting. So your mind just starts looking for patterns, right? Similarly, I think I went back to the book, and it's been like a Bible in terms of methodology of how to build a big picture for yourself on anything that I take. Like any product, any new role, any new solution, or any industry, the Lean Canvas sort of becomes the go-to methodology because I'm so comfortable with it. And I think to your point, I've shifted from just reading books for being a prolific reader to really then actually testing it to see, oh, this doesn't work for me, or this really works for me, kind of thing. So that's why I was curious to know your relationship with books and how has that helped you?
What is your favorite? So sci-fi is one of the genres I never read and just very recently started reading about a few years ago.
Quite a few actually. I think I forget the names.
I just read this book called Project Hail Mary.
Oh.
You read it? Yes. It's just, yes. I loved it.
Yes. There's a new series now. What is it called? Sandman?
Sandman. Yes, I've been hearing about it. Yeah.
The book, you should read the book.
Okay.
Oh, it's amazing. The book is amazing. I've not seen the series. I just started. But the book is like, oh God.
Yeah?
Yeah. Okay. It's like, it's a mix of so many things, like, duality and a whole bunch of things.
Right,
It's beautiful.
right, right,
And
right.
yeah, so I think one of the things we talked about, and I was really fascinated by it, which was your four quadrant framework that you talked about. I wish someone had talked to me about it when I was like 20, 25, because it sort of gives so much clarity in terms of at different points in your life, how that needle shifts in terms of percentage priorities around. Um, can you just first talk about the four quadrant, and then we'll go a little deeper into that one?
Sure. So when we moved back from the US, it was to take care of my mother-in-law who was battling cancer. She had terminal cancer, and both my husband and I talked to our respective companies, he with SAP, me with Adobe, to spend 2 years in India. And our children were 2 and 4 at that time. So, of course, like a lot of women, I suffered from the superwoman syndrome and thought I can manage everything and travel and between the two of us and two little kids and my own parents, Alok's parent. And of course, 1 year into it, it was just like overwhelming. There was just so much going on. Things were breaking down. And it felt like there was never enough time for anything. So gradually, it meant a shift. It meant just stepping back again, zooming out a little bit to say, what is important and what is not at this stage of life. And I figured, I love to take walks as well, as I figured like there are four quadrants that I care about. And, like the first phase of life was a lot about the ability to have freedom to make your own decisions. You're able to do what you want to do. You want to study this, you go study this. You want to marry this person. You want to have kids when you want to. You want to work. Want to continue working through your pregnancy. All of that was about being able to make your own choices, and so it was about freedom. The second stage was about so many things that were on the plate. So as I zoomed out, there were kind of four quadrants that stood out. One was work and career. Second was family. Third was play or community. People around you who you would like to support and be there for. And fourth was self. And I realized that until the self is energized, all three are at risk of falling off track.
Yeah.
And essentially, there are lots of things you do in those four quadrants, which are, some are de-energizing for you and you still do it, and some are energized. It's like a battery pack for you, right? When there are a few things in your life which are energizing you, a few de-energizing things in other parts of your life, you manage and you continue to do. The problem happens when you're feeling de-energized in every quadrant of your life. And therefore, the self becomes very important to understand the self, what energizes and what de-energizes you. And when you put it like that, you begin to see that, look at different phases of your life, there will be a certain balance. So balance becomes key in terms of kind of whether a day-to-day fulfilling life or being able to doing your responsibilities as expected or whatever you've taken on your plate, right? So there is a phase of life when, again, early on, the first 20, 25 years, it's all about you, you focus on building your career and you're not even thinking too much about the community and family at that time. You found this freedom, parents are fine. So, and self also, you feel like you can conquer the world. and you can do what you want. So it's a lot about your professional career. Then, the next phase, pretty much family comes into play, your community, whether it's your professional community, the colleagues you have worked with, all of that, friends, the society you live in, complex you live in. And so you have to then, balance becomes key. There is, how do you kind of make sure? And so it's okay at that point if you are saying, look, at this stage of my life, I'm going to focus on career 50% and 30% on my children, or maybe zero on community and 40% on my children. But understanding the self becomes very much more important.
Yeah.
And then as you go forward, and now I'm kind of at that stage where my children are much older. They don't need that much time.
Leaving the nest.
They're leaving the nest. They're getting ready to lead their own life. So now you are at that stage of your career where you don't have to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. You kind of, giving becomes a lot more important. So community begins to take a lot more center stage in your life, versus, family is always there. Work is also always there. Like you were saying, right? We are going to be living whatever, 70, 80 years. So you can't think of life without work. But the nature of work changes and the focus changes.
Yeah. I have some questions. Yes. I can see patterns, and I want to tell you this. When you talked about freedom in the early years, and going back to your journey, my mum never wanted me to go outside of Bangalore and study. Actually, beyond where my 4-kilometer radius of my house, she didn't want me to go and study because she felt the daughter will do drugs. So I got into some really awesome universities, but she said, no, you're not going there. So it comes back. So by the time I finished my engineering, I was like so looking forward to like, okay, this is done. And now I can just really live my life the way I want to, the freedom part of it. But when you talk about self, what goes into that self? Is it just about figuring out who you are, what your likes, dislikes are, or strengths are? Or is it also going into health, your personal space of love? Who do you surround yourself with? What's that self frame? Because career is also about you in a lot of ways. So what goes into the bucket of self?
I actually haven't thought about it in that kind of, I can't come up with a framework for that. But I guess when it comes to self, it is mind, body, and soul by and large, right? And so body becomes extremely important. Again, the first 25 years, you kind of, everything is running. You hit your 40s, you begin to see some bones creaking and some, ankle twists and fractures and pigmentation on your skin, and all of that begins to happen. And then when you're kind of hitting 50, it happens to you faster. So body, is becomes the realization that you have to take care of your body, begins to set in. And mind, you begin to realize that you are the sum total of the people you are interacting with, the closest people. You, in fact, begin to talk like them, look like them, think like them. So just your closest friends, the stuff you read, what you consume in terms of media, books, begins to define you. You begin to be able to verbalize some of who you are and how you think. And then soul is about all the big questions you ask. Why this? What is the purpose of it all? And Is there all of the questions that disturb you, which is, you see your parents wither with old age, or pass away. So in our case, both of Alok's parents passed away, and my father passed away 3 years ago. My mother is with me, and she's 85 now. And with each passing year, like, I just see her becoming more and more, like, I almost feel like the full circle of life, where she used to be this really assertive woman, and like everything she could. She's not very educated. She got married when she was 12, but she had, she would be doing everything from that to kind of being comfortable with how things were, to then become like a teenage kind of a behavior where I want it this way only, to then toddler behavior where, she wanted attention. And now she's beginning, and if she'd say something, I'd fight back and say something to her, and she'd fight back, right back. But now if I say anything back to her, she just doesn't say anything. And it's just so, it's like not her, but she's behaving like an infant. So it's like a circle of life. And when you see your parents go through that journey, you begin to ask those questions, right? As a soul, as an individual, what do you want to leave behind? What is the meaning? How should you conduct yourself in the most meaningful way? So I guess those would be the three parts of self.
I think it's important to understand it also, because what I've seen is, to your point, when you're in your 25s, you're running fast. 30s is when you start looking at, career-wise, where am I heading? But at the same time, your family is growing, other part of the family is aging, and then you're also ambitious to your career thing. And thereby the self sort of starts losing the kind of priority that it needs to get, because there's no time. Of course, some people do the community bit, but a lot of us are still in those two quadrants right there. But by 40, you start coming back to self, even career, because stability still is a matter. This third quadrant starts to become a little more clearer. You start internalizing and accepting things for what it is. And that's when the community starts kicking in. Right? You can so relate to this. And first time I heard you tell that, I was like, the way you structured it for me, we all go through it, but then we don't internalize it in a visual manner to say, okay, this is how my percentage shift has been going on. And now this is the shift that I'm going through, and this is fine, it's okay. And that's where the investment on self comes in, because you constantly invest on yourself to be ready for this change that is happening around you also, right?
Absolutely. And as women, as mothers, we feel guilty, right? Like, I will speak to I have friends who are homemakers, and they feel guilty they didn't pursue their careers, and because they took a break for 5 years, 10 years, and there are friends who have very successful careers, and they feel guilty, I didn't spend time with my children. But when you look at it in a slightly larger perspective, I think it does two things. One is you realize you can't have a perfect balance at any stage of life. That's not going to happen. It might be very brief periods where you might experience it, but by and large, there is going to be prioritization happening there. And the second thing is that you don't need to beat yourself up for not being able to strike that balance, and be ready for the next. There are still options available. These four exist as options, and you can choose to exercise that option if you want to. So for women, I used to struggle with this question of women can't have it all, or they can't be two serious careers in a family. But that's a paradigm question, right? You shift the paradigm from a corporate ladder to a career portfolio. Of course, you can have
Yeah.
two different careers, and of course, you can have multiple careers during your lifetime, right? So, so that I think that, but it's only through investing in self that you begin to realize that yes, that option exists. It's not as if I didn't do it for 10 years, I can't do it for the next 10 years. It'll be hard. Every journey is hard, you kind of look under the hood. There are micro failures. It's littered with micro failures. um, but but it's possible.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just reflecting on, I mean, when I was working, when my daughter was, I was pregnant, I got promoted. And one of the things that was asked was, in 2 months, you need to come back. So my mom was like, you're crazy. I think you should just quit, take a break for 6 months. And this is the same lady who always says, you should always be financially independent and you should always be, have a career ambition. It's the same person who, the moment the daughter was born, it was like, it's a complete different story over there. And it's a juggle. And it requires you to go back to yourself as well as these three quadrants and then plan it in such a way that, okay, I can't do all of this, but I want to be here and here in this percentage. And so what kind of support system do I need to build? So I have time for myself, as well as this, and there's a balance. And you will always go through that guilt of, oh, maybe I could do a little more. But yeah, that's what it is. And the acceptance of it is the most important thing in that process.
Absolutely, yes.
I think this leads to the bigger conversation of designing your life there now. Now that we've got this picture of the 4 quadrant, it was very interesting to see how the concept of design thinking was applied to the biggest project we live on, which is our life. And I was like amazed. The first time I was introduced to it was, I told you, right, my friend Stuti, and I was in a very confused state as to what am I doing, having worked for 25 years, what's the bigger thing I'm headed towards, what am I like really pursuing, because it was never titles. I was sort of trying to get experiences in different roles and understanding how a full organization functions. And I kept telling her, people have purpose in life. I don't seem to understand what is a purpose in my life. And that's when she said, there is this one program or it's a course. It's a full 3-month course or something that people take in Stanford, which is the Design for Life. And she asked me to give me about an hour and a half. And she said, I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions. And the first thing she made me do is that life chart I was telling you. It was right from when you can remember till today. Put your highs and your lows and let it be not just work, but life. And the first time I did it, Pooja, it was like such an eye-opener because there are patterns. And I was amazed with just that. And then the whole process of this ideation and design thinking was like a big aha moment. Tell me first, design for life. What is the premise of it? What are some basic pillars of it? And then if we can go deeper into how does one maneuver through it? And if we can talk about it with your journey and how I applied it to my podcasting journey, I think that'll be a great case study for someone who's really trying to understand this subject.
Sure. So just the context of how I got to it, again, after IntelliThoughts got acquired, I was wondering what next. It was also a stage of life where I necessarily didn't need to make money or make a name for myself. It was about, I have a life ahead of me, and what do I want to do to make it meaningful? And again, this book that had been lying on my shelf, I just happened to pick it up. I picked it up 2 times before, and I thought, useless and kept it. But this time, when I kind of started to get into it, it was very interesting. So, design thinking as an approach is a very popular one for any product, right? You say, whether you are designing a toothbrush or an aeroplane, the principle remains the same.
Yeah.
So it's a 5-step process, which is around empathizing, ideating,
It's experimenting.
defining. So defining, ideating, defining, prototyping, and testing.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So now these two profs at Stanford, Bill and Dave, I think, they said, why don't we apply it to life and solving life path questions? And this course, they floated it as an elective, and the course is the most popular elective.
It's the most expensive. It's like $1,500.
Yeah, okay. But it's the most popular on Stanford campus, right? So essentially, the idea is that life is not an engineering problem. When you think of a problem as an engineering problem, it's about finding the right answer. Like that, for me, there is a right journey, life journey. And that's kind of how we are attuned to think about it, right? You go to your undergrad, you go do your master's, and then do a job, and then climb a ladder, and then reach a point where you retire. Yeah. Now, if you think about it in this, so their point is shift the paradigm completely from that one engineering problem and solution to say a design problem can have multiple solutions. There can be multiple fulfilling life paths for you. Now, when you start to think like that, then the question becomes, what do you want? What is your objective? What gives you joy? All of those questions begin to come into play, right? And there is a concept called gravity problems, where they say, now at this age, I might want to say I want to become an actress. I can't, right? That's a gravity problem. It can't be. So you just let that go.
Yeah.
But for others, you can begin to think about it. And therefore, the first step of the process, which is empathize with yourself. What gives you joy? What is energizing you for you? What is engaging for you?
It goes back to a self.
It goes back to the self, right? So empathize with yourself. Most of the time we are beating ourselves up. You didn't do this. I wish I'd done this. I didn't go for exercise. Empathize. Then the second stage is to question some of those assumptions, and they put a process around it in a way, right? So when you empathize with yourself and then you question, you essentially say, okay, what is your North Star? By and large, which direction are you going in? And all of us are products of our context, right? Like you said, your mom, she wanted you to be independent and financially independent, but when the baby came, that is the most important thing. They're a product of their context, right? The family and the child comes above everything else, right? So you begin to say, okay, what is your North Star? And it is different for all of us based on the context that we come from and the lives that we've led. And you say, okay, my life goal is this and my professional goal is this. From a work perspective, this is what I find fulfilling, or I want to accomplish this. And from a life perspective, this is what I want to accomplish. And it helps to write it down, because otherwise it's like a lot of loops in your brain.
It's like multiple tabs.
Multiple tabs are open. When you write it down, it gives you clarity. And then...
So what you're also saying here is you don't just look at it from a work point of view. It is integrating work and life together because it's about you. And you are a combination of both of these, and maybe a lot more than just this. The rest of the quadrants of play, family, all of that comes in.
Yeah.
And so you incorporate all of that to say, okay, who am I?
Yes, absolutely. And so, work is a large part of our lives, and life is what we live when we are working. So, if your work is not in sync with your life goal, then you can't be fulfilled. You won't be happy. But if your life goal is in sync with the work that you are doing, then it's going to get amplified.
Yeah.
So if you just think of it as a sine wave, two sine waves, work and life, if you put both of them together such that they are at complete odds with each other, then it's flat lined. You can't be happy. But if you put them such that your work goal and life goal is overlapping, it gets amplified. So
the
they are in
energy.
coherence.
Yes.
They are in coherence versus non-coherence, right? But to decide to understand that, you have to sit down and think and discuss with friends and put it on paper. And then comes the stage of questioning or ideating, where you begin to say, okay, now, really understanding what on a day-to-day basis does this mean. So, if you are you realize you're very upset over something and you go out for a walk and you see a nice bird or a cuckoo sound and you suddenly feel better. You realize that gives you joy. There are some situations in which, you are sitting in your office and there is the HR person screaming on the other person, is this how you're supposed to do it, whatever, and it just completely de-energizes you or upsets you, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
you have your life goal, your work goal, are they in sync, not in sync, and then what does it mean on a day-to-day basis? So you are now ideating and saying what makes sense. So you use a tool like mind map to be able to say those 3 or 4 or 5 big words that emerged from your pattern matching, and put one big word in the middle and say, what comes to mind when you think of that? And the purpose of that is to not let your rational brain, the neocortex, interfere with your kind of thought process. In design thinking, right, there is a fantastic YouTube video of IDEO applying design thinking to the trolley design, right? So the first part, it's a divergence.
Yeah.
You let your mind diverge. You just create so many different options to say, this is also possible, this is also possible, this is also possible. And then at some point you begin to converge.
It's like brainstorming. You don't stop by questioning, oh, but this is not possible. Just brainstorm and start putting the ideas out there, and then start striking off things. To your point about gravity and things like that, those could be criteria to strike off, saying, okay, these are my top 3 or top 4.
Exactly. So there is the whole divergent, this mind mapping exercise is divergence. Think of everything under the sun. Don't apply a filter. But, we have been conditioned to apply filters all the time. We couldn't function if we were not applying filters. So we tend to say, oh, I could be a writer. But it takes you. Do you remember last time you tried to write, it took you 6 months to just even finish a 300-piece blog that you needed to write? So we beat ourselves up.
Yeah.
And the idea is, with that mind map, circumvent the neocortex. Just let it flow. And once you've kind of decided on those 2 or 3 themes, then you say, what might be the avatars that emerge out of it? And that avatar, and they actually suggest that you actually draw it, again to bypass your rational brain, where you actually draw the avatar to say, this is what I could see myself doing. something that might be truly wacky, something that's kind of in your zone, something that just pushes you. So it could be anything. But what kind of, so, and after that is the next part of prototyping. Because, just through mental analysis paralysis, you won't be able to find all the answers. You'll have to try some of these things out, right? Of those three things, avatars that have emerged, sitting in your room just thinking, you won't be able to find answers. You have to build towards it. You just don't desire, you build your way forward. You don't think your way forward, right? So you have to start building now. And what that means is, go out, talk to people, interview people, put yourself in those positions where, like you said, you actually did a podcast, a 6-7 series podcast. And only when you actually build it, you realize, I have to modify it in this way, but it is fulfilling. I can do it, right? So then you prototype and say, okay, this makes sense. And you go out and test the market and then take it to market.
Yeah.
And the same is true with some of the life decisions. What I find where people get stuck a lot is, saying, should I take the leap? Should I not take the leap? Right? Should I quit my corporate career and become an entrepreneur or not? Now, this middle step of prototyping is very powerful in that way. You don't have to quit before taking the leap. Start to do some of those things. If you're thinking of an e-commerce business, start selling a little bit on any of the platforms. Talk to 5 different people who are building an e-commerce platform. Go work for free for 2 months and put yourself in those positions, and then say whether you liked it or not. You might not like it. You might love it. So there is a bridge between you deciding and taking a leap, and prototyping offers a very good solution for it.
Yeah. One thing that I really experimented in my journey, I've shifted industries and job roles. I think about 10 plus job roles and 9 plus industries I've worked over the last 25 years. And if you're actually stepping back and looking at it, to your point, it's wacky. I mean, what was I thinking? But then what I found is this slow motion multitasking. To your point, prototyping is a great word because it allows you to experiment, and it might be a success, or you might just figure out this is not for me, or I like doing this, but there's no potential in it, or there's no market for it. And it allows you to experiment without that whole burden of fear, failure, and that big risk aspect that we come with. And slow motion multitasking allows you to address that other point of, I don't have time, right? And I found that to be very useful in this journey. When I did the podcast thing, to your point, it actually, how it helped me is by first experimenting to be as a guest in others' podcast, and then see, okay, I'm not going to try these. These were, it's great, but not my type. And I don't want to put questions. I think I want to have conversations, because to your point, the life and work balance and the self part comes in as to what do I want first. Right. And as I started doing this, I was telling you, at some point I did 9 episodes per week. And then I realized that's sounding like work and it's not fun. And so I found that good threshold point, or that nice tipping point where it's a good balance of the 4 quadrants that you were referring to. And I think applying this, starting with that life view or the mind map or any of these methods, to first know what brings you joy overall as an individual, and then experimenting, coming back to your point, journaling, writing it down. I've noticed, Pooja, that over weeks I was able to articulate what is attitude makeover, what is the purpose, and it becomes finer and finer and finer as you experiment. And you will make mistakes, a lot of mistakes, but the journey is really beautiful in terms of evolving as a better individual every day. Is that the same experience, or I'm like way off?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a similar experience, Saujanya. And, the metaphor of a road trip might kind of be apt here, which is you have to have a North Star, some kind of a destination, some place that you want to go. It might be a range, but some place where you are headed. So there is a North Star. Along the way, you will have to decide whether you want to take the scenic route or the highway or the toll road. You might have to make all of those decisions. Yeah. And each of those is fine as long as you know that, some people have problem going on a scenic road because, you have to stop at every red light and you're feeling anxious. I want to reach there quickly. So you kind of go from there. And the thing is that you can't foresee all of the obstacles, all of the accidents that will come along the way, all of the blockages that exist there until you reach there.
Yeah.
So you have to keep driving.
Yeah.
You can't be sitting here and say, I'll reach my destination without driving. You have to drive. Yeah. And it's only when you reach closer to that point is when that point shows itself.
Yeah.
So you can't, you have to keep climbing up or you have to keep driving to reach that point where you can encounter it, and then you can say, look, this doesn't make sense or this makes sense. But you won't have all the answers in your head without trying. And therefore, the thing that you talked about, which is, talking to friends, just journaling with each episode, with each guest coming in, you find your balance through that, but only through doing.
Yeah. What also helped me, Pooja, what you mentioned as part of this methodology was you sort of put, I don't think we've talked about that, the avatars.
Yeah.
Right? So first, let's talk about the avatars, and then I think we can internalize as to how it applied in each of our cases.
Sure. So, actually, I now remember it was called Life Odysseys. They called it the Odyssey.
Oh.
So, from the mind map comes the Odyssey, is what is the life journey you want to take. And those were the 3 avatars of you. So I saw myself as I went through the process. And I'll talk a little bit about the role of friends and people as you go through this process later. But for me, one was I love to problem solve and build stuff. So one question, and I can't build something with hands, so it has to be more cerebral, building a company, so on. Second was some kind of a gyan, like whether I am talking to people, answering questions, supporting them in their journey, or even seeking it myself through reading, through interacting with people, through learning. And the third one was nature. So it was like an organic farmer. I can see myself becoming an organic farmer or at some point. And the second one, I could see it could take the shape of teaching as a teacher in a school, or as a lecturer in a higher ed, or as a coach, or as a podcaster, So that is the second journey. And the first one that I talked about is what I'm on, is building a company. With IntelliThoughts, I felt like we were tackling early years education, but we also only took it to like 6-7 centers. It reached a certain scale. It had a certain level of impact, but I felt like I wanted to have a larger impact, again, in education space. And Avishkaar is a great platform to enable that. So once I thought about, I want to be a third time entrepreneur. And I had some factors in my mind, but I knew it had to be in education or in something related with gender diversity. So, but so once I had that in mind, then what I was looking for or what I wanted to create began to happen. So, so yeah, those are life Odysseys. So you could take any one of them and they would be as fulfilling. And what is important is the process of decision making. It's not the decision itself. If you've gone through due process in making the decision, whether that decision might work out or not, you know that you did the due diligence on arriving at that decision. Yeah. And that gives you the satisfaction.
And that's through the prototyping.
Exactly.
Yes.
That, I went through the whole process. That was the best. You create your options. And once you have the options on the plate, that is the best option I could. I might want to go and do organic farming today, but I have 2 children, who have to send to college and who have lots of things. I can't do that right now.
Yeah.
So there is the process matters a lot. And therefore, going through a process like this is helpful.
You were mentioning about friends in this.
Yeah.
Tell me the role of them. Because I think earlier in the self part also, we've talked about the circle. And
so, when we say know thyself, right? Know yourself. And we can overestimate ourselves. We can underestimate ourselves. We might be blind to some things. And when you have a good group of friends, and my husband is kind of in that category, with a few friends who know you enough to be part of and who you can be vulnerable with. It really helps this exercise, because what happens is when you are thinking about this, again, I'll come to a quadrant, which is, there are things that you think you are very good at. I think it's called the Johari window, right?
Yes.
Where you think you are very good at and the friends think you are very good at, wonderful. You've proved it, that's great. Then there is a part where you think you are very good at, but your friends think you're not very good at it. You're like, surprise.
Really? You? I've seen that.
And, only closest of friends can, are you smoking dope? Just forget about it.
Yeah.
Right? Only closest of friends can do that to you. And it's good to have that challenge network. Or, and then there is a quadrant where you think you are good for nothing and your friends think, oh, you're great at it. What are you talking about? Right? And that is helpful too, because you never thought that I could do that, or I'd say, look, I don't think I can go up on the stage and do that. So what are you talking about? You did a good job then, right? And that helps. And then there is, of course, something that neither you are aware of nor your friends are aware of, and those are blind spots. So just doing it yourself versus doing it with a set of friends makes it all the more richer and meaningful, because they are able to bring in perspectives that you might be blind to.
Yeah. I can so relate to the exercise that me and Stu were doing, where she was helping me really understand how to design this at that juncture that I was. And one of the things, I struggled with this part, right? Like what I know about myself, what others think of it. And I said, look, I'm aware of the Johari window, but, is there a simpler way if I don't have that clarity? How do I go about? So one of the things she made me go through is continue as is with what you're doing. Can you see the avatar for the next 5 years, how it pans out? The second is an avatar where assume, like to your point, when the telecom thing, the market hit in 2001, my first job in the US was in a startup called Tachyon. And I worked for 1 month. They sponsored visa, they finished all that. By the time I started, the company had to dissolve. Everybody lost their jobs, right? And so the second avatar is assume that the space you're working in is vanished, it's gone. Then what's your 5 year looking like as an avatar? The third one she told me was assume there is no boundaries on someone judging you, or you're trying to become famous, or money is a constraint, or title is a constraint, and there's no such thing. What is that avatar like? I think that when I did that, the one where dissolve whatever is there, I couldn't relate with that because I felt technology is always going to survive. But then I could go back to that tachyon time to say, yeah, if that happens and the whole business gets fired, or you have to shut off, then what happens to you? What is your 5 year looking like? That helped me to come back to look at, this is what myself wants to understand. This is what the community part is. This is what the family balance I want to have. And this is the aspiration from a career or a personal growth perspective I want to actually have. It gives so much clarity to the persona I wanted to build as a podcaster, how I wanted to conduct this, what kind of guests. I didn't want really famous guests. I wanted someone who's had a journey, so there's experiences and there are failures. I wanted to talk about the vulnerable side of things. And it gave a lot of clarity. And then the prototyping, to your point, actually further solidifies these to say, okay, this sounds like work.
Yeah.
This is a lot. This is interesting. And newer avenues start opening, talking in companies about an experience, one-on-one mentoring and coaching. And I think it really opens your avenues for how you look at this itself, right? And for me, first time I was introduced to it as like, wow, how come no one's talked to us about this before? But I think what really helps in this conversation, Pooja, is how you first gave the framework. I must tell you, you're a wonderful framework person. The 4-quadrant framework first, because that really sets the context. And then to do this, because that's where everyone is unique and how it applies to you will be different to how it applies to me. When you have the 4-quadrant first and then you go through this design for life, there are avenues and opportunities, and sometimes they connect as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you could call it your personal dashboard.
Yes.
Right? Just a personal dashboard.
Yes.
Where at some point, those 4 metrics on your dashboard, where you see something is running on high and something is running on low. Not everything will be running on high at all times.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to ask you questions. I was going to come to that because when I started this journey, and I did blog about it recently as well, is like, if you're not measuring it, you don't even know how it's working or whether it's working for you or not.
Yeah.
So also what you measure is very important.
Yeah.
So how do you identify what is that dashboard for yourself?
Yeah. I have conflicting thoughts on it. And I'll tell you why. When we were building IntelliThoughts, my co-founder and I, it was a bootstrapped startup. And it was at a stage of life where my children were little. We both decided we don't even want to take a penny because flexibility was more important. We didn't want to travel. We wanted to grow it at our own pace. So we bootstrapped all the way through. So we actually didn't measure. We did measure, we did have a sense of revenue and profitability, and are we meeting our expenses, and do we have at least 3 to 6 months of working capital at any point in time? All of those basic things we were measuring. But most of the time we did what we wanted to between, which was true to our ethos, why we were doing what we were doing. We could continue to do that. Now, as we are building Avishkar and we have funding and investors, there are just like these set of metrics that we are tracking, and CAC and LTV and CAC for every distribution channel, and CM1, CM2, just a whole bunch of metrics we are tracking, and there's a very clear path. Okay, this is where we are headed, and this is what we want to do. It does make it a lot more stressful, right? Because you always have this eye on the goal and destination, like I have to reach there and in this time.
The needle's not
The
moving.
needle is not moving. So I guess in life, I would not like to. There are some, like in as far as work is concerned, yes, you're measuring it because you're answerable to your investors and your employees, and they all depend on you to essentially fulfill on the promises that you're making, and therefore it's very, very important to be on top of all of those metrics and stay true to it. But when it comes to life, I guess there are just a lot more variables, and there is a lot more to enjoy without measuring something. So I'm right now learning the piano. So I just gave the grade 2 exam. But it is swan sukhai. So, if I were doing it seriously and I had to miss 3 classes in a row, I would beat myself up. Like, you can't be doing that. You have to take your grade 3 exam by this time. But it's okay. I won't do it in 3 years. I'll do it in 4th year. That's all right. So I guess more important than measurement for things that are important to you, maintaining consistency of effort over a long period of time. Not just, you go through those phases where you say, okay, oh, this is great, let me do it. And you do it for 1 or 2 months and then nothing happens, just like let it go. To build anything meaningful, it requires sustained, consistent effort over a long period of time. And as life, we do have a few, of course, anything could happen tomorrow. But by and large, I guess what I measure now myself against is consistent effort towards things that are important for me. And if you fail one day and are not able to do it that day, you don't do it twice. Just pick yourself back and get up on the horse. But just staying consistent over and giving it enough time for you to say, look, this is not working. But other than that, I'm thinking, on the other parameters, I don't measure that much except for work.
So this was very interesting for me because see, in the content space, and I don't come from the content space, right? So I've been a sort of a techie and solution sort of person, ideating and solutioning. That's been my core space, and I suddenly ventured into this. And I'm a very metrics person. So initially I started saying, okay, I need to get so many subscribers. Then I realized when you're going after those numbers, they drive every behavior of yours.
Absolutely.
So I decided that's not the metrics I want to look at. Instead, again, one of the things I learned in this methodology was reframing,
yes.
right? So I reframed the problem or the statement of how I measure it. Why am I doing this? Just so that I am in the journey of learning, and in the process, if XYZ benefits, whoever XYZ is, come along in this. I'm not here to become India's, Joe Rogan or whatever. In the process, it happens, great.
Yeah.
But that's not my aspiration. So in that case, am I learning was one thing. Every conversation, And which is why I started saying, okay, I'm going to blog after every recording, because what did I learn? What were key takeaways for me? So that was one. And the second thing was, is this, do I like it? Like I told you, right? Initially, when I started recording, I think after like 7 or 8 episodes, it started becoming monotonous. And I went back home and I said, hey, I'm not, not happening. So again, it was like, it was not happening, was not about the podcast. It was, I was taking the same topic and getting different guests, but it's the same topic.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, reframe, right? It helped me then to go back to say, okay, now that it is different areas of this big subject, it allows me to learn and change and become better, and the attitude makeover really happens. So it's my journey, right? So am I liking it? Was the second metrics I looked at. Third one was, to your point on that 4 quadrant, is there a balance? Because all my life I've been running after I don't know what. And I'm a very ambitious person, but success is different for me from many others, right? So each one's success is different. So I figured, are those 3 quadrants that are really important: the self, the aspiration, and 4 quadrants: my personal time at home, my family, and am I giving back to community? Is that balance happening? The moment I realized it's not happening, it allowed me to come back and do course corrections, which is where I told you from 9 episodes, I said 4 episodes per week, per month. It's the balance. And, it allows me to balance that. The fourth measure I looked at is the emotional quotient.
Yeah.
To your point about self, it's a lot of change that you have to go through, from that personal talk of you idiot, you stupid, what were you thinking, what stupid thing are you doing, to today it's like, oh wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right? Even small things like, like the other day we did the recording virtual, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I think when I changed the dashboard from my whole old corporate mode to this, to the 4 quadrant,
Yeah.
actually it does change what your drivers are,
Yeah.
and makes it more meaningful. Have you seen this with you?
That's actually a fantastic way of putting it. And I'd not thought about it in the terms that you describe it. But as you were speaking, I was thinking, you said you're very ambitious. But ambitious is not necessarily synonymous with competitive,
Yes.
right? You could be ambitious, you want to go somewhere, but you're not competing with anyone around it. You set your own metrics and you set your own around these 4, around your aspiration, and focus within versus outside.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you look at, what you want of yourself versus what you want of the world, like when you were saying it, I could see it happening, right? In the work arena, we are making promises to the investors and shareholders, and telling them that, so we are answerable to them and we have to run by those metrics.
Yeah.
But in other spheres of our life, we're only answerable to ourselves. If my daughter is not happy, I'm not happy. And therefore, I want to be able to find time to take a walk with her and figure out what's bothering her. And that is success for me.
Yeah.
Nobody else expects me of that. I'm not answerable to anyone. It's just my parameter that I set for myself. So absolutely, the way you are describing it, it is you set your own metrics for what you see as success, and run by those rules.
Yeah.
So again, taking the kind of road analogy, you might decide decided to take the scenic route, and that's fine. You will stop at the cafe to enjoy a beer in the middle of the day and then go. Whereas for someone else, they want to reach the destination by 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing is that if you have promised someone, I will reach there at 5 p.m., you better be
can't.
there. Then you can't take the scenic
Yes.
route.
Yes.
You have to be on your own to be able to say, okay, I'll reach when I reach, but
Yes.
I will take this stop at this cafe.
Which is where that 5-year view really helps, even though it's not like a 5-year planning like how we do
Yeah.
the 5-year planning the government does, but it's more like an approach to,
Yeah.
okay, this is going to go on for 5 years. Are you okay with that?
Right. Because consistency, you don't build anything meaningful overnight.
Yeah.
You when you started the podcast, you did 1, 2, 3, 4, and still nothing's happening, and then there is a tipping point where people begin to notice. But it takes time and consistent effort, and like you were saying, fine tuning it, because if you are not energized by it, that will come across on
Everywhere.
the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so being authentic and being genuine about it and identify, but you can't do it until you build your way forward, until you keep doing it for a certain period of time and saying, look, this is what I have to address, or this is what I have to fix. So consistent efforts, a 5-year journey that way makes sense, that you give it your consistent self for some time to say if it makes sense or not.
What I'm also learning in this conversation is, because most of my audience are these mid-career people who are going through this midlife, I don't want to call it crisis, but it's a journey.
Questioning.
Yes, right? You're pondering through this. You could be working in a company, you could be at one point where you're taking a break, you could just be switching to a new job, but it applies to all. It applies to each and every individual. It's not just specific to someone like me who's jumped out of the corporate world and starting something like this, to an entrepreneur like you. It could even be to someone working in a company on a regular job. But you can apply it irrespective of where you are in your life and what role you're playing, right?
Absolutely. I just, two friends of my kids, they are both at Stanford, and the pressure on these kids is so immense today, where you almost feel like, oh, this one choice is life changing. If I take this internship versus do this research project or apply, if I don't get this job, then what will happen. And it can be paralyzing because you just put so much, and these children are bright and hardworking children, but there's so much pressure that the system and they themselves put on. And so they think of each choice as, oh my God, what happened? But when you start to look at it in terms of a journey, in terms of the choices you want to make, in terms of, it's not always a leap, there is a bridge. You can prototype, you can identify whether it is, it is quite helpful and perspective changing.
Yeah.
So I think it works for pretty much at every stage of life.
Yeah. And I think that self part evolves beautifully in this process because it's very consciously going through these avatars. And I think you keep looking at the avatars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a dynamic process because we are evolving, right? As individuals, we are constantly reinventing ourselves, changing, either by virtue of what we want or by virtue of the environments we are in, the people we meet, the experiences we have. And therefore, it's good to revisit it every few years to see where you're at.
Yeah. Well, Pooja, thank you so much. This is such an insightful conversation. It definitely helped me get clarity on, when you spoke about it, it said, I've used frameworks and methodologies. First of all, I was in awe of that because I think it's very important to have frameworks and methodologies as you go through a journey. But this has been very detailed and insightful for me. And thank you so much for making time.
Thank you so much, Saujanya. It was a real pleasure to meet a kindred spirit and actually spend time with you. We've met a few times, but have not had a chance. And if you were to say this in front of my children that, it's a good thing you use frameworks, they would just laugh it off because they make fun of me all the time.
You should meet my daughter. Every time she'll say, oh, mindset.
Yeah, mindset. Framework, mental model. So it's good to hear it from you. Thank you, and thank you for having me over.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is your experience being part of the podcast. And two is, what does attitude makeover mean to you?
Being part of the podcast, I have to say, you have this innate calmness about you. And I'm sure others have told you this, but you have this ability to listen, which is very hard to find. So the conversation was so enjoyable because you take the time to listen, and you just have the calmness and depth of having thought through some of these things which we all deal with in our lives, so I really enjoyed every minute of the conversation, and might have meandered quite a bit in the process, but personally for me, I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. I must tell you, I've been a bad listener. So one of the things I consciously chose to do as part of my thing of attitude makeovers, I want to become a better listener. So if you listen to some of the early podcasts, before you answer, I'll tell one, I have an opinion, I have another story and things like that. And I don't think I'm still there, but I've come a pretty decent way in terms of just hearing and actively listening. It's a hard thing to do.
It's a very hard thing. It's a very hard thing. And I think for me, my children have taught me that.
Yeah.
I read a book called How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's a fantastic book.
Okay.
But the one thing I remember from that is when your kids are talking to you, acknowledge. Most of the time when talking to kids, they will say, Mama, I'm afraid I won't be able to pass this exam. And our instant reaction is, what are you talking about? I've seen you studying. You're so smart. If you just put in this much effort, you will be able to make it. What we have done in that process is not acknowledge the feeling of the child. They are feeling afraid, and they are. She is saying this because she genuinely is fearful. And when I again did not acknowledge it and said, I just jumped to solutioning right away without even acknowledging it. So the child is not even able to listen to the solution because she's thinking, you've not even understood my problem.
Correct.
Right? So just the act of acknowledging and active listening comes with great difficulty. It's not easy.
I think, the first part, I still do it, I think.
All of us do it. All of us do it all the time.
Oh, baby, I think you've studied enough. Don't worry, I think you're just stressing too much. But first acknowledge. I think it's important. Yeah.
So I think you have this beautiful capacity to listen and be calm and acknowledge what the other person's saying. And therefore, it was, I really enjoyed the conversation.
And what does attitude makeover mean to you?
I think attitude makeover to me is thoughtful action, reflecting on the choices that you have made or identifying patterns there, and then based on that, charting your path ahead.
Yeah.
So, from having this mindset of these are my only options to having that abundant mindset and saying, anything is possible. I can, there will be limitations on certain paths. So it's a shift in thinking. It's a reframing of what is possible.
It's a very conscious way of relooking at the art of the possible for yourself.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja.